Hey, this is actually the segment that I thought of first when I thought of the show, which is called Cross-Atlantic Crosstalk, which is where folks who I know, we get together and basically we gripe about the politics in our home countries under the guise of covering current events. What could be better? So with me on the inaugural edition, and who I hope will be our real regular core, is our own Julia Doubleday, of course, Deputy Director of Committee, and Ellie Mae O'Hagan, who is a political strategist and director of class. And we worked on the UK elections together back when we were young people, back when it all mattered. And this week saw not only the 100th day of Joe Biden's presidency, which is a Hallmark holiday invented by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, but also a sort of pseudo State of the Union in which he outlined some of his bigger goals. And so this was a real call to what the political scene will be in the US, and I think globally, as many folks are kind of pacing themselves against what the Biden administration does. I mean, Julie, I'd love to ask you if you watched the speech, what you thought of the speech, what was there and what wasn't there.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the risk of just turning off all of our target audience right away, I think that I've generally been more impressed with Biden than I expected to be. To be
You're
fair,
unsurprised.
yeah, I mean, to be fair, I had super low expectations, so it wasn't basically doing anything that is at all progressive is going to be like a pretty big win for him in my book. But yeah, I mean, I've been impressed with what we've heard about the American Rescue Plan, which is a $1.9 trillion program. In that plan, we have direct aid, unemployment, nutrition assistance, pretty much just things that I wouldn't expect from a more centrist figurehead like him. I mean, I kind of feel like it goes to show that the work progressives have been doing in the last few years has been super effective. I think the same way that we've seen Schumer moving to the left out of fear of an eventual AOC primary, we also see that the centrist establishment understands that they have to make some concessions or they're not going to win another election. So,
did you see that bananas ad? We'll have
sorry?
to look and analyze that. The Schumer non-ad where he's like running and he looks really bad. Well,
No.
I will show it to you later. I will show it to you later. It is
Is he
very
going running and it says running for you? Because I feel like that's very common.
probably. Heard across the pond, Ellie, have these last 100 days and has this speech sort of been like hey, let's get our shit together and surprise people too moment vis-a-vis what Julie is talking about? Or, how does it play? I mean, I think we were talking before, and I do see a lot of I wish Keir would give it the old Joe try on UK Twitter.
Yeah, so the speech itself hasn't really had much of an impact because we're too busy watching our government sort of engage in shenanigans, let's say. But in general, over the last 100 days, obviously you have a section of the left here that is like, Biden is a centrist, he's done X, Y, Z, he'll never be acceptable to us. But actually, most progressives in this country, or sort of, who commentate on these things, I would say, are asking, why is Keir Starmer not doing what Joe Biden has done? Why is he not promising similar things? So I think our government stimulus package is a 60th of, equivalent of being a 60th of the size of America's stimulus package. So that's the sort of disparity that we're seeing at the moment. And I think the key frustration for the left here is that Keir Starmer has made his mark by alienating the left, as opposed to trying to sort of bring them in as part of a coalition, which from our vantage point, that looks like what Biden is trying to do. And I think the reason for that is because we did have a left leader for 4 years. And so in a sense, I think there was a sort of belief amongst the centrists of this country, although they would never phrase it this way themselves, that we'd got too big for our boots. And so it was sort of inconceivable that the left could be allowed to sort of, have a position, especially after we lost an election. So, so Keir Starmer is sort of, he has kind of turned away from the left. And it's partly the what I just mentioned, but also it's perceived in this country that the group that swung the election are like, I guess, the equivalent of like a Wisconsin voter in America. So, you know, somebody living in a post-industrial community who is very fiscally left-wing, but socially very conservative. And so Keir Starmer has been embracing social conservatism in order to win over that voter, but has sort of neglected the fact that they are also fiscally left-wing because he needs to sort of ingratiate himself with the establishment as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're talking about with the establishment feeling like the left got too big for its britches or whatever, that's definitely something that's happened here as well. But I think what we've seen with Biden is just his administration has much more of a willingness to incorporate the left's demands. I think just because they're more in touch with how urgent the need is to do that. And I do think it's probably more who is surrounding Biden. So the people working for him, the people close to him are really pushing him to do this more than it is, you know, Biden having this massive change of heart. To a great degree, not all politicians, some of them are real ideologues, but a lot of politicians really rely on the people around them to decide how they feel about certain things. So to me, I feel like this administration, even though Biden himself was never further to the left of Obama, it seems like Biden's administration is to the left of what Obama's was. And that's really just the climate and a sign of the times and the fact that there are younger people working in this administration. But yeah, we've definitely seen that same kind of attitude here for sure. And I think that's something that really turned people off about the Clinton primary in 2016 is just that after she won, she could have done a lot of things to try and reach out to the left. And instead she picked Tim Kaine as her vice president, which I think was correctly interpreted as being kind of a fuck you to the left. Like, look, you're not going to get anything from us. Not even the most basic just gesture, because the vice president doesn't really have that much power.
Yeah, I think in this country, we've just learned that a guy called Simon Fletcher might be leaving Keir Starmer's team, and he worked for the Mayor of London, Ken Livingstone, who is sort of a bit disgraced now because he's made some anti-Semitic comments. But before he was disgraced, he was a sort of quite venerated left-wing Mayor of London. And then I should just mention, for Simon Fletcher's sake, that he didn't work for Ken when he made the comments that have sort of landed him in trouble. And then Simon Fletcher also worked for Jeremy Corbyn for a few years as well. So he was sort of seen as one of the left-wingers of Keir Starmer's team. And there's rumours now that he's leaving, which means that Keir Starmer really won't be surrounded by that many left-wing people at all. He will mainly have people from the Labour right and from what we call in this country blue Labour, which is the faction of the Labour Party that believes that in order to win, you need to be sort of socially, fiscally left wing, but socially very conservative, and that you
we call them blue dogs in the States.
Blue dog Democrats, yeah.
Blue dog Democrats.
Yeah. So very similar.
Yes. Yeah, so that's really who he's surrounded by now.
Yeah, I think. Oh, go ahead.
Go on.
I was just going to say, I think for people who don't work in politics, it really, the people who run and the people who win get so much attention, and they build such a personality cult around them that people really underestimate the influence that staffers have on electeds. Just because also electeds don't have time to do the kind of research that needs to be done around all these policies. So it really does matter who's surrounding an elected official.
Yeah, I mean, I run a very small organization, but I run an organization, and actually even just running an organization, because you're the one that's ultimately responsible, you actually want to seek advice, you want to take advice all the time, because otherwise all of the decisions are just on you. And so I feel like being a president or being a prime minister or the leader of a political party must be like that times a million. And so I think it's completely logical that presidents, leaders of parties and so on will be guided by what they're hearing rather than just saying, I'm going to go this way. But I do think there is a sort of limit to that. So, so like someone like Tony Blair, for example, while he did sort of listen to his staff, he did have a very clear idea when he got into office of this is where I want to take the country. This is what I want to do. And it does, from our perspective in the UK, it does look like there are things about Biden that he like really believes. So, for example, he often says like, I'm a union man. And I think he sort of is a natural coalition builder. He doesn't seem to make political enemies that a lot. Like that doesn't seem to be something he seeks out. Whereas I think what's notable about Keir is that he really doesn't have that many politics. He really isn't very political himself. And I think I am not clear why he wants to become Prime Minister. And I'm not sure that he is either. And I think this is why we have in this country, Labour being at the moment quite incoherent, because there's no sort of ideology anchoring the leader and anchoring his project. And so it's just sort of veering all over the place depending on what the focus groups are saying.
Did you all get a chance to, sorry, I was in the internet ether there for a while. I hope nobody missed me too much. Did you all get a chance to talk about the communication styles? The wallpaper.
No.
Okay, what I think is interesting when we compare and contrast these two human beings politically is that, Joe Biden, take him behind the barn, beat him up, kind of sort of flirted with this kind of rough and tumble, back and forth, knife fighty online campaign for about 5 seconds during the election, and has dropped it hotter than, dropped it faster than the hottest potato to sort of do a more stately, grave statesman thing, the FDR thing, whatever you want to call it. Keir, who sort of, is otherwise sensible barrister type, has been doing a lot of this kind of meme stuff and fake links, and to the stunt today with the wallpaper because it's curtains for Boris. Where do you think that's coming from? Do you think it's getting traction? When, as you're saying, people are looking for the Labour Party to get more serious, is this the correct strategy for communication style?
So on the wallpaper thing, that's a real frustration of mine, because you probably heard that last week Boris Johnson, it was alleged by a number of media outlets, including the BBC, that Boris Johnson had said about coronavirus, let the bodies pile high. Yeah. And, that's obviously like a shocking thing for him to have said. And then it later emerged that he had sort of possibly, there's some suggestion that he might have used, broken the law in the funding that he's obtained to redo his flat in Downing Street. And that one of the suggestions is that he used a furniture company that was more posh than John Lewis, which is sort of widely known as the kind of middle-class furniture shop. So Keir Starmer going to look at wallpaper was not him saying curtains for Boris. It was him going to look at wallpaper to be like, John Lewis isn't too good for me. Which was to me.
I thought it was picking out the wallpaper, which is what they say about someone who's assumed they've won, like they're picking out the wallpaper for the Oval Office. Yeah.
Well, and the fact that you thought that, I think, shows that it hasn't worked, right? The fact that you didn't get what he was trying to do. And you are more in tune with British politics than the average person in Britain, So it did. Yeah. So first of all, I don't think it worked, and second of all, I think making this a row about whether John Lewis is a posh shop or not is to me is much less important than talking about the things that our Prime Minister apparently said last week. So I think first of all, there's that element on that particular issue. I found that really frustrating. And in terms of, he's sort of trying to do these trolling things. And I think basically with Jeremy Corbyn, that really worked. A lot of the kind of memey, jokey stuff, would get literally millions of views, as you remember, Arun. Mm-hmm. And and so I think maybe they're trying to replicate that. But I think one of the reasons why it worked with Jeremy is that Jeremy was extremely popular amongst young people. If you were 34 or younger, you were very likely to vote for Jeremy. And actually, before I came on this this show, I looked at Twitter and I saw that Sky News had published a story saying that Keir Starmer has basically wiped out the support of young people since he became leader, that like now the support that they had for Labour is kind of now gone. And so I think then what you're left with is like this kind of internet trolling that feels really try hard, that feels really authentic, because it's a guy in his like 40s or 50s doing it to a bunch of other people who are like in their, you know, sort of mid 30s, like, and older. I say this as someone in my mid 30s, by the way. Like, I'm not saying that's old, or at least I hope it's not. But like not young, not like youth. It's not youth culture. It just comes across like, like Dr.
cringy, bad.
Oh no, for sure. We're not part of youth culture anymore. I just found out about TikTok celebrities. They're really rich. I don't know who any of them are. So we're old. We're old now.
It's terrifying how many followers they have, and
and I think they also understand like the message, like the actual joke, whether it's a troll or a joke or being funny, the actual joke has to have the message in it. I mean, I think that's what makes as non-journalists, what we do sort of harder than satirists who just go and they can make fun of Boris Johnson's hair for half the time and the other half the time make fun of his policies. If you're actually trying to communicate politically with humor, it always has to be on message, and the joke has to be the message, and it can't just be a joke around the message. And I feel like
exactly. And you know this better than anyone, Arun, right? That you can't invent a persona that isn't there. Like, and so I'm not criticizing Keir Starmer for like trying to do inventive communications. I'm criticizing him for doing inventive communications that are so far removed from his public persona. And actually, he is he's got a kind of like lawyer dad vibe is his vibe. And actually, I feel like you could spin that into something. You could actually create that into something quite appealing. He's the sort of like, he's the friendly dad who wears a fleece, but he's kind of reliable and like a nice.
He's your friend's dad who you kind of like a bit more than yours, maybe.
Well, or like you have a little bit of a crush on if you're a girl or whatever, or a boy, and like, so I think, so it's like there is actually a positive version of Keir Starmer, but it has to be based on kind of the raw materials of Keir Starmer. It can't just be invented out of something that doesn't exist. And that I feel like is the problem with this whole, like, Keir Starmer is a sort of internet troll, which I guess is, or, he's like irony Twitter, which really just isn't who he is. And I think that's why it's kind of falling flat.
Yeah, I think that's right. I do want to shift gears and talk a little bit about COVID. That's a thing that's happening. All three of us, I am in Germany, where we're behind you all, but, in the UK and the US, certainly vaccinations are getting to the point where endgame policies are being made, right? Like, I know, Ellie, you can tell us about the UK, but like, restrictions are being pulled back with the idea that they never come back in again, right? So what does that look like on the ground?
Here?
Yeah.
So at the moment we're expecting. So basically, they release restrictions every 5 weeks, and they say that's to see how it affects cases, and then if they have to renege on their plan to release restrictions, then that'll give a week for businesses to prepare. So like every 5 weeks, we're getting more and more restrictions released. So at the moment, we're allowed to hang out in groups of 6 outside. We're allowed to go to the gym. We're allowed to get our hair done, although I haven't had mine done yet, hence the scraping back. And we're like, and so and then in the next month I think we'll be allowed to meet indoors in small numbers. And then in the end of June, we've been told that the restrictions will be released completely, and that'll be that will be done. However, our furlough scheme, which is the scheme that pays for people to sort of stay off work, so that they don't go into the office and mix, so that the government pays people's wages, basically. That has actually been extended to the end of September, which kind of suggests to me that the government is expecting some kind of disruption beyond June. And then also Boris Johnson and SAGE, which is our sort of committee of scientific advisors, have said that we should expect a third wave as well. So at the moment, it feels kind of quite confusing about what's going on here, because our vaccination program is pretty successful, which, by the way, for an American audience, is thanks to our public healthcare system and not the government. And so that is going really well, and cases aren't rising, but it is but it is. I'm unsure about what the rest of this year is going to look like for us.
Yeah, and I think the scary thing is if no one's sure if they're wearing their mask, is it okay? I'm using a bad metaphor because masks, but like on the airplane wearing their mask, should they be helping the child next to them? And like, there's a lot of countries who do not have the same means who are not able to procure vaccines. And so, Julie, how do you see the politics of this playing out between the global north and the global south as the global north emerges?
Right. So, I think you're touching on this really massive issue that, certainly is being discussed on the left quite a lot, but hasn't really broken through too much into the mainstream press. I've seen articles about it here and there, but I think it needs to be a much bigger issue. The issue of the TRIPS waiver and the ability for other countries to access our intellectual property, the IP of these pharmaceutical companies. In terms of how I think it's going to play out, I think there is a lot of pressure from the left on Biden right now. I know that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, a lot of other prominent progressives are pressing him on this. But there's also, of course, the pushback from Big Pharma, from the Gates Foundation, about why we can't waive IP rights. And there's a lot of arguments. There are a lot of arguments going around that I think the left needs to be aware of and to be able to debunk them. The Gates Foundation, most of what the Gates Foundation does, it has this really undemocratic stranglehold on global health in a lot of developing countries, even though Bill Gates was never elected to anything. Just because he's this rich white man, he is able to set global health policy basically all over the world. And his argument is that, look, even if we waive the IP rights at this point, it's too late, essentially. It's too late. It's not really going to make a difference, and these countries aren't going to be able to make this vaccine because they don't have the resources to do it. So, there's a couple. It's not
going to make a difference. Let's try it anyway.
Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack in that. One of the things I think should be acknowledged is that, in the event that there aren't the resources to manufacture vaccines in different countries, we should obviously assist with getting them the resources to be able to do that, not just for this vaccine, but also for, having a future global public health policy that serves us all and that allows us to fight the next pandemic as quickly as possible. The idea that we don't have this infrastructure, so let's not build it. It's like, say, if before we built the national highway system, we were like, look, there's no highway, so how am I going to drive out there? Well, we got to build it. What you're saying is there's an urgent need for that thing and it doesn't exist yet. So we should make sure that is a thing. If in fact that's the case, that these countries can't manufacture this drug. Of course, there's also the reality that there are parts of the world where they could be manufacturing this if they did have access to that IP. So there's a racism inside of a colonialism, inside of an imperialism, and then just tie it up with a bow. And that's pretty much everything the Gates Foundation does.
I'm sorry, I have to say it just because it's I don't want to quote her wrong. There was a tweet which was look, all you yoginis who love India, what have you done for someone in India today?
Oh yeah, don't get me started about
true.
The
so Ellie, the progressive community, the diverse progressive community of the UK, which especially has a large Indian population, what is going on inside the community politically? And I don't mean, of course, are there associations, sending help? Of course there are. I mean specifically on the political left.
So from what I can see, and there may be people on the UK left who will disagree with me, but from what I can see, we are donating to charities there, and there's a campaign called Just Treatment, which I think is calling for the sort of patents to be,
the public pressure campaign. Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah, but it's not. So I think one of the context here is that Britain, has got a sort of history of giving a lot in international aid, which, by the way, it has cut massively in recent years. But it still kind of rides on that reputation. So, we've sort of pledged some vaccines, and then there's this kind of idea that we're doing our bit. So there's a lot of, oh God, it's awful. sort of reactions, but there isn't really like a widespread mainstream campaign to give vaccines.
Like a policy problem that can actually be fixed.
Yeah.
Go on.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think this sort of gets to the heart of like what we want to do with the show as well. Is just that, the left in the U.S. and maybe in the U.K., a lot of the left, I think, in the developed world, like, there's just not as much insight into how these decisions that are made by global bodies affect us and affect other countries, and how we're playing into those decisions or how we're benefiting from those decisions. So I think it's really important that we like draw these lines and connect these dots. Even just simply saying like, look, the vast majority of people getting vaccinated right now are in the so-called developed countries in the West, in majority white areas, majority white countries. I mean, if you need to draw a direct line between how capitalism is related to neocolonialism, is related to racism, this is a great example. I mean, it doesn't get any more clear than this when it's really quite clear how racially stratified access to the vaccine is.
Yeah, and to me, it's just so sinister what you were saying with the Bill Gates thing, where it's like, yeah, it's just not going to work. And because he's Bill Gates, people are like, okay, so let's not try. And you're like, what do you mean? Like this is horrific. Hard. I mean, we've all seen it's not a spike what's happening. I mean, anything else we've seen.
Quite frankly, the Gates Foundation is a big defender of IP in all situations. So this isn't specific to this. It's not like he's just saying it about this one thing.
Yeah, they're not changing their tune.
They've always been defenders of intellectual property and patent rights. It's really crucial to Bill Gates's fortune and a lot of the work they do. So I think if you go back actually to like 80s and 90s, there was a similar discussion where it was, should other people be able to manufacture generic AIDS drugs? And it was the same argument. It was like, well, they're not going to be able to do that. And it wasn't true. It wasn't true at all. Now they're much, much, much cheaper than they were 10, 20 years ago. Shouldn't have taken that long. And right now, of course, we're hearing that a lot of people won't have access to the vaccine to maybe 2024, maybe later. I think people also need to understand that presents a public health threat to the entire world. To allow the virus to keep mutating, it's going to come back and bite you on the ass.
Triple mutated.
It'll be back. Yeah. The triple mutant strains that are already out there. So to just say, well, we'll get around to vaccinating them in 3 or 4 years, it's not just really cruel. It's also just really atrocious public health advice.
Next week, let's add an Indian journalist into the roundtable and actually hear about what they think folks could do. So maybe we can even push people in the right direction. Because yeah, of course, charity is good, charity is important, but this is like a systemic policy thing. And I wish there was an organization, maybe there will be, but there should be something called the next pandemic or whatever, that right now is already planning on all the things that should be planned, because as far as I can tell, looking around everywhere around the world, ain't nobody really thinking about it and planning that hard.
Right. No, where this is, again, I think, Naomi Klein has talked a lot about disaster capitalism. And I think under these capitalist regimes, everything is about next quarter and nothing is about next year. And it's certainly not about 5 years down the road. I mean, everything is about how do we make money right now. And that's also, why we saw this just absurdly bad response to the first wave. Everyone was like, oh, well, we can't shut down the economy. If we had just shut down the economy a year ago, shut down the economy, shut down everything for 8 weeks, 10 weeks, we would have been back to normal. We could have done what Vietnam did or what parts of China did, had a very intense lockdown, and then controlled the spread. Instead,
we just don't have this. I got to be honest with you. Just watching the way the U.S.
No, you're absolutely correct.
The UK, Ellie, I'll give you the last word on this, but what do you think? Just here's a hypothetical, random. What will be different during the next pandemic in the UK versus this time around? Well, will there be less pressure to put cuts on the NHS? What is the actual?
Well, I think a bit that will depend a lot on who's in government, I think. But I think generally speaking that there will be the government, I think, will shut down sooner, because if you remember here, we had this bizarre 2 weeks where the government was like, oh, we just need to let everybody get coronavirus, but just a bit slower.
I do remember that, yeah.
Yeah, so like we just need to build up herd immunity. So, you know, you had Boris Johnson on the morning shows saying, oh, we just need to, saying like, we're just going to take it on the chin, you know, and like...
He did his level best.
Yeah, I know. And then like... So we like wasted, we had like people from Italy, you know, doctors in Italy being like, lockdown now, you have 2 weeks on us, you need to do it now. And we like just ignored that and wasted those 2 weeks. And then we've ended up with some of the worst, one of the worst situations in the world, obviously except for India and, you know, some countries in Latin America and the United States and on some metrics. But like, but yeah, I mean, so... I think that there'll be an expectation that we would lock down straight away without sort of dithering around with herd immunity. I think that's it. I mean, I'm really, like, it really depends on who's in government. But if it's still this government, I don't think that there's going to be many changes to how we've dealt with it, because they are ultimately the reason why we've dealt with the pandemic the way that we have, which is to sort of protect salaried workers and throw a lot of people to the wolves, is ideological, because our government doesn't really believe that the purpose of government is to step in. They don't like doing that, and I think
absolutely
they'll try hard not to do that the next time as well. And so, for all of his sins, that's why I would like Keir Starmer to be our next prime minister, because
oh yeah, we're going to tell you from the United States of Biden, it's better that way. You know, like
yeah,
like it's a little better. It is
a little better. It's a little better.
Little better.
Yeah.
Cool, y'all. Thank you so much for coming on. And next week, can we do this next week?
We can do it next week.
Yeah.
Okay,
We'll do it next week.
Ciao, y'all.
Ciao.
Bye.
La imagen por la cual vale la pena arriesgar la vida, sacrificarse hasta la muerte en los campos de batalla de todos los continentes del mundo.